Good morning. I'm attorney Ben Crump, along with attorney Lisa Park, attorney Eric Harris, Justin Preston, and Cliff Jones. We have the honor of representing the family of Nolan Wells. We have present with us his mother and father.
For the first time since their son's body was pulled from the water, Nolan Wells' parents sat down face to face with the district attorney herself. Same day, their legal team dropped another bombshell. A private investigation, staffed with former law enforcement and federal agents, is now digging into this case alongside them. That's a real shift. For weeks, this story has been running on contradictions, secondhand claims, and accounts that don't line up. Now, for the first time, there's an actual process taking shape. A grand jury on the horizon, a joint agreement to examine Nolan's phone, and a family that stopped waiting on someone else to bring them answers. We're covering everything that came out of this, the press conference, the funeral date, and a warm, personal tribute from the coaches who knew Nolan best. Before we get into it, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want more true crime documentaries like this one, because this case is moving fast, and you don't want to miss the next update. Let's start from the top. Ben Crump stood alongside attorneys Lisa Park, Eric Hertz, Justin Preston, and Cliff Jones, flanking Christine and Elmore, to walk reporters through what came out of their sit-down with Jackson County District Attorney Angela Myers-McElrath and her team. Crump described it as a respectful meeting, and the single biggest piece of news to come out of it was this. McElrath told the family that once the Sheriff's Department wraps its investigation, she's sending this case to a grand jury. Now, it's worth being precise about what that actually means, because it's easy to read more into it than what's actually being said. McElrath herself has been careful, in separate comments to NBC News, not to call this a confirmed criminal case yet. In her own words, her office doesn't want to rush to judgment or speculate, but she said this is a priority, and her team is working hard to understand exactly what happened. Referring an unnatural or suspicious death to a grand jury is standard procedure in Jackson County. It's a process, not a verdict. But for a family that spent weeks simply asking for a thorough investigation, having an actual procedural path laid out in front of them mattered. Crump described the tone of the meeting as genuinely respectful on both sides. He said the family and their legal team were honest and direct with McElrath, and she was equally honest and direct back. He also framed that honesty in a broader context, saying the family's lived experience means they have to question every institution they deal with, law enforcement included, and that being direct with the DA, rather than simply accepting reassurances at face value, was part of honoring that. Because there's been so much confusion around this case already, it's worth breaking down exactly what a grand jury referral does and doesn't tell us. A grand jury doesn't decide guilt or innocence. That's not its job. Prosecutors present evidence, and the jury decides whether there's enough to formally bring charges. It's a screening step, not a trial. That means this development on its own doesn't confirm anyone will ultimately be charged, or that investigators have concluded a crime even occurred. It simply means that once the Sheriff's Department finishes its work, everything gathered gets formally reviewed through this process, instead of the case quietly fading out. For a family that spent weeks worried this might just disappear from public attention without resolution, that alone is real progress, even without knowing the eventual outcome. And then there's the detail that might carry the most weight of anything to come out of this meeting: Nolan's phone. Crump announced that the family's own experts and the DA's team have now agreed to jointly inspect the device together. Attorney Eric Harris is helping lead that effort, working alongside former law enforcement specialists brought in specifically to handle the download. Here's why that matters. For weeks, almost everything the public knew about that phone, the missing content, the deleted messages, came entirely from the family's own account of what they found when they checked it themselves. There's been a real, open question hanging over this case about whether that device had ever formally reached investigators for an independent forensic review. This agreement closes that gap. Instead of one side examining the phone and reporting back to the other, both sets of experts now review the exact same data at the exact same time. Whatever that download shows, confirmed deletion, something more complicated, or something nobody's anticipated, both sides will be looking at identical evidence, which removes an entire category of dispute that's followed this case for weeks. Christine's original account, that she and her sister found the phone completely wiped, no saved photos, no videos, checked before the automatic deletion window had even passed, has been one of the most emotionally powerful pieces of this entire story from day one. But until now, it's been an account from one side only, without independent confirmation. That changes now. Attorney Eric Hertz gave real detail on what the family's own independent investigation actually looks like right now. He said they're fielding somewhere between 50 and 100 calls a day from people who were on Horn Island that day, or who know someone who was. That's a serious volume of incoming information for any legal team to manage. And he said something worth sitting with. Some of the people calling his team haven't spoken to local law enforcement at all. Part of the job now, he said, is convincing those callers to cooperate directly with investigators too, instead of only sharing what they know privately with the family's side. He was upfront about the limits of what they've actually learned so far. Because of confidentiality protections that apply even to victims, the family didn't walk away from this meeting with every answer they wanted from the DA's office. That's not a knock on the DA. That's just how those protections work. But it's exactly why the family's own independent investigation keeps running in parallel with the official one, rather than winding down now that formal steps are in motion. Now here's one of the more important moments from this press conference, and it deserves to be handled carefully. A reporter asked Crump directly about his earlier claim, made at an earlier press conference, that Nolan could be heard on that viral video saying a specific angry phrase demanding his phone back. Crump's answer this time was noticeably more careful than his original statement. He said, "That's what a witness told his team, and that's what they reported." He then said another witness has since come forward, claiming that voice belongs to someone else entirely. His team now has audio experts analyzing the recording, but as of this press conference, whose voice is actually on that clip has not been confirmed either way. This matters because it's essentially a public acknowledgement that the original claim was built on second-hand witness identification, not confirmed audio analysis. It also lines up with what one of the young men present that day has said separately, that the voice on the video is his, not Nolan's. Crump didn't dig in or dismiss that possibility. He said plainly that his team is being more careful now about distinguishing between what comes from a witness account and what comes from confirmed evidence. That's worth pausing on. For weeks, that one quote functioned almost as the emotional centerpiece of the public case surrounding Nolan's friends. It got repeated at press conferences, cited by commentators online, treated by a huge chunk of the public as settled fact. Watching Crump walk it back himself, in front of reporters, is a real moment of course correction, even if it doesn't tell us yet who the voice actually belongs to. It's a reminder that even attorneys acting in good faith can end up amplifying claims that don't hold up under closer scrutiny, and that walking those claims back publicly, instead of quietly letting them fade, is its own form of accountability. Crump also addressed criticism over his team reposting unverified content online, including a photo that later turned out to be unrelated to this case. He pushed back on the idea that reposting something means endorsing it as fact. He said his team reposts specifically to get more people to come forward, and that they've consistently labeled those posts as reposts, not confirmed information. He framed the whole approach around one goal: getting more witnesses on the phone. He called it a relentless search for the truth, one that means casting a wide net, even knowing some of what gets shared along the way will later turn out to be inaccurate or unrelated. Whether that's the right approach is a fair thing to keep asking, but it's a deliberate strategy, not carelessness. Attorney Hertz raised something more pointed during the press conference, a specific legal obligation that hadn't been met. Under Mississippi law, crime victims are entitled to an incident report, along with certain other information, within 72 hours. That window had already closed by the time of this meeting, and the family still hadn't received it. Part of the purpose of sitting down with the DA's office was to start actually collecting that information and build better lines of communication going forward. As of the press conference, the family still hadn't received that incident report, though the DA's office had committed to improving that going forward. One of the more revealing moments of the entire press conference had nothing to do with evidence at all. It was about how isolated this family had felt from the investigation itself. Christine said the last time anyone from the sheriff's department reached out to them directly was the previous Tuesday, and even that was just a reply to a text she'd sent asking for an update. Going forward, the DA's office is taking over primary communication with the family through a victim advocate assigned specifically to their case. Christine said she appreciated the DA's office owning that gap, acknowledging it had been on them to maintain that communication, rather than leaving the family to chase it down. That detail helps explain why this family pushed so hard for their own independent investigation and outside legal team in the first place. It wasn't only about distrust in the outcome. It was, in real part, about the day-to-day experience of feeling left in the dark, waiting on a single text message to be answered, while their son's case sat unresolved. Crump was also asked about the toll this case has taken on people connected to it, beyond the investigation itself. He said he's seen countless friends of Nolan's receiving death threats, and he specifically mentioned AI-generated fake videos targeting Christine, calling them, in his words, deeply disturbing. All of this while she's grieving, fighting for the truth, and preparing to bury her son in the same week. He made a broader appeal at that point, aimed less at investigators and more at the public following along. He said, nobody's life should be threatened for seeking the truth, and nobody should be presumed guilty before there's actual evidence. He asked people to hold two things at once, that they might have different views on what happened, while still agreeing everyone deserves to pursue the truth safely. That deserves more attention than it usually gets in cases like this, because it's easy to treat as background noise next to the bigger investigative questions. Real people, teenagers, young adults, some of whom haven't been accused of anything by anyone with actual authority over this case, are reportedly getting death threats. A grieving mother is dealing with fabricated video content of herself in the exact week she's planning her son's funeral. Whatever anyone ultimately believes happened to Nolan, that layer of harm, coming entirely from strangers online, rather than anyone connected to the case, is its own serious problem, one that exists no matter how the underlying investigation resolves. Christine and Elmore used part of that same press conference to share funeral arrangements publicly for the first time. The service will be held at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs on Monday, July 20th, with visitation running from 9 to 11 that morning, followed by the funeral itself. Christine was direct about the tone she wants for what comes after. Instead of a somber, traditional gathering, the family is planning something closer to a celebration, held at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. She said plainly, Nolan wouldn't want people sitting around crying. She wants it to feel like a party in his honor instead. Media will be allowed to attend, though the family has asked that the event otherwise stay focused on family and close friends. She specifically mentioned reaching out to Coach Les George to make sure Nolan's teammates, from middle school all the way through college, are able to be there. She made one more direct request to the public. If demonstrations continue, including on the day of the funeral itself, she asked that they stay peaceful. She said Nolan was never someone who wanted conflict of any kind, and she wants his memory honored that way. The list of people supporting this family has kept growing, and several of them have shared exactly why they stepped in. Tyler Perry is covering the full cost of the funeral. In a separate statement, he explained what motivated him personally. He has a nephew whose death in a Louisiana prison he still questions to this day, and he's been separately helping another mother in Florida seek answers about her own son. He described not having answers as its own kind of agony, and said he hopes Nolan's parents, and everyone who loved him, get the truth of what happened in Mississippi. Colin Kaepernick continues covering the cost of the independent autopsy. Reverend Al Sharpton has agreed to personally officiate the service. Christine also named local officials who've reached out consistently. The mayor of Gautier, who she said has texted to check on the family almost every single day since this began, and a local community leader who's done the same. She said the outpouring from teachers, classmates, and teammates sharing memories of Nolan has genuinely warmed her heart during an otherwise devastating stretch. She also addressed the GoFundMe gently, stressing they're not asking anyone to give beyond what they can. If someone can't contribute financially, she said, prayers are enough. It's worth pausing on the sheer scale of what's assembled around this family at this point. A nationally known civil rights attorney, a former NFL quarterback funding an independent autopsy, an Academy Award-nominated filmmaker covering funeral costs out of his own pocket, a civil rights leader agreeing to officiate, local elected officials checking in daily through personal text messages rather than press statements. That mix of institutional star power and quiet, everyday support says a lot about how far this case has traveled beyond a single local tragedy. Earlier in the week, before this press conference, Christine had shared something quieter and more personal online. She wrote that planning the funeral of her 18-year-old son doesn't feel real, that her emotions are all running together at once, and that she's grateful for the moments she can still watch old videos of Nolan and hear his laugh again. She closed simply, "We miss you so much, Nolan." It's worth sitting with the contrast between that post and the press conference that followed days later. In public, Christine stood beside attorneys, discussed grand juries and phone inspections, pushed for institutional accountability. In that post, alone with her grief, none of that procedural language was there at all. Just a mother, missing her son's laugh. Around this same time, Nolan's football coaches at Southwest Mississippi Community College shared their own memories publicly, offering a warmer, more personal picture of who he actually was. The team's wide receivers coach recalled Nolan's official recruiting visit to the school the year before, a moment that should have belonged entirely to Nolan. Instead, he remembers Nolan's younger brother standing nearby, watching with excitement as Nolan tried on a team uniform, and Nolan making sure his little brother felt just as much a part of that moment as he did. Head coach Les George described Nolan in simple terms: a genuine person, salt of the earth, the kind of guy who wants to see the good in everyone and makes people around him feel valued. He shared a specific memory from the team's season opener the year before. Nolan didn't get any playing time in that game at all, and George said he remembers Nolan celebrating just as hard as anyone else on the sideline, genuinely thrilled for his teammates, even without getting a chance to contribute himself. George said Nolan never seemed to have a bad day, whatever he was personally dealing with. A hamstring injury, anything else. He approached it all with real optimism. That kind of testimony adds something the investigative details alone can't. So much of this case has understandably been built around contradiction. Timestamps, deleted messages, competing accounts of a single afternoon. That's necessary work, but it can start to flatten a real person into a set of disputed facts. These memories do something different. They're not trying to explain what happened on the 4th of July. They're describing who showed up to practice, day after day, long before any of this happened. Sheriff John Ledbetter has continued commenting publicly throughout this stretch, and his position is worth including in full. In an interview on Good Morning America, he said it's important his department not put itself on a timetable, but that being diligent about every fact matters just as much. And that diligence is exactly what the family deserves. He's welcomed the family's independent investigation publicly, rather than treating it as a challenge to his own department's work, saying his office is working toward the same goal: a thorough investigation and the answers the family deserves. Whether that stated alignment holds up, as both efforts continue running in parallel, is something only time will show. But at this stage, there's no public indication of open conflict between the two. There's a real tension worth naming in Ledbetter's own words. Refusing to rush and being diligent sound complementary on paper. In practice, for a family living through this, they can feel like competing demands. Diligence takes time, and time can feel indistinguishable from delay to someone waiting for answers about their child. Based on Christine's account of a communication gap that stretched down to one unanswered text message, that balance hasn't always been struck well so far. Whether it improves now that the DA's office has taken direct ownership of communication remains to be seen. So, pulling this all together, the DA has confirmed this case will eventually go to a grand jury once the Sheriff's Department wraps its investigation, though officials are careful not to call this a confirmed criminal case yet. Nolan's phone will now be examined jointly by both the family's experts and the DA's team, closing a major open question about whether that device had ever formally reached investigators. The family's independent investigation, staffed with former law enforcement and federal agents, keeps running in parallel, fielding dozens of calls daily. Crump has walked back the certainty of his earlier claim about the viral video's audio, acknowledging it came from a witness account that's since been directly contradicted. A legal deadline for the family to receive an incident report has already passed without it being delivered, And Christine and Elmore have set July 20th to lay their son to rest, choosing to frame that day as a celebration of who Nolan was, not only a day of mourning. Underneath all the procedural updates, the coaches who knew Nolan best left us with something worth holding on to. A young man who made sure his little brother got his own moment in the spotlight, who celebrated his teammates even when he wasn't the one getting the credit, who by every account from people who spent real time with him, simply never had a bad day. This update reads differently than most of what's come before it in this case. Earlier developments tended to deepen the mystery, another contradiction, another unverified claim, another piece of evidence raising more questions than it answered. This one is mostly about process finally catching up to the demand for answers that's been building since day one. None of it guarantees a specific outcome, but it suggests the sheer weight of public pressure has actually produced real, structural movement in how this case is being handled. That doesn't mean the waiting is over. Both autopsies remain unreleased, the grand jury hasn't convened, the phone hasn't yet been jointly examined. But for the first time in weeks, the shape of what's coming next is actually visible. We're staying on this case, the grand jury process, the joint phone inspection, and both autopsy results, whenever they land. We'll bring you the facts as we get them, verified, and not a moment before. If you want to catch every update on this case the moment it drops, make sure you're subscribed. We cover true crime documentaries like this one regularly. Thanks so much for joining us. See you next time.
And some members of her team, we had a very respectful meeting. The thing I assume some of you may know, the thing to announce, she shared with the family that there will be a grand jury that she will turn this case over to once they have collected all the information and finished their investigation. We also agreed that we will have a mutual inspection of the cell phone with our experts and their experts. Attorney Eric Hertz is helping lead the investigation team with former law enforcement experts who are going to help us with the cell phone download. So everybody will be able to see at the same time what the cell phone has. We also talked about trying to make sure we dot every I and cross every T. I know that we're getting about 50 calls a day to 100 calls a day from people who were there on Horn Island, people who are familiar with individuals that were there on Horn Island. And so we continue to be steadfast in trying to get to the truth of why Nolan Wells is dead. At this time, we'll have Attorney Hertz say a few words, and then Christine and Elmore will just talk about the homegoing services and celebration for Nolan, and then we'll take a few of your questions. Attorney Eric Hertz.
Thank you. Right now, there's a lot of unanswered questions. We appreciate the district attorney meeting with us, but because of certain types of confidentiality that even the victims are not allowed to know, we did not get all the answers we want. We have an independent investigation going on that involves former law enforcement, federal agents that are going to be looking into all the different information we got. The calls are coming in and we're getting a lot of information. Some of the people that I spoke to are not talking with law enforcement here. We're going to be trying to get them to cooperate with each other because we want to make sure the narrative, which has been put out that is false, is going to be corrected. So at this point, we just ask everybody to keep calling in if you have any information and let us know. And I personally, if we validate you're a legitimate call, we'll call you and talk to you. And I thank you all for showing up today.
And now, Christine and Elmore will just share with you some details of the homegoing celebration for their son.
Hello everyone. So the homegoing celebration, the funeral will be held at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs. It is going to be, visitation will be 9 to 11 and then the funeral will start after that. The plan is for the repast because, again, we want to celebrate Nolan. And he would not want us to be sitting around crying and eating. And so what we're going to do is kind of have a party to celebrate him, and that'll be held at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. So we really do want to keep it for family and friends. We are going to allow media to come in as well. And lastly,
His teammates.
Oh, absolutely, teammates. We've already contacted Coach Les George because we want to make sure that those guys are there. Former teammates from high school, middle school, teams that he played against. You guys are all welcome, but of course, we want to make sure that our families for sure and close friends get there. So I do want to just say, for those of you, again, if you are having protests, even the day of his service, I am asking you guys to just keep it peaceful. Nolan would never want any type of violence or anything like that. He was not that kind of person. So if you guys would, again, just be peaceful. And to the community, thank you so much. Just the outpouring of love, support. We've had some local officials. Mayor Casey Vaughn from Gaucher has reached out to us. Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you. He has, it's almost been every day. He's been texting to check on us. Also, Jeffrey Hullum, thank you so much. He's been texting pretty much every day. Receiving a lot of stories from Nolan's teachers, which just warms my heart, his classmates, teammates. So again, for those of you who have donated to the GoFundMe, once again, I stress, if you are not financially able to, we're not begging for that money, okay? If you're not financially able to, we understand. We thank you for whatever you can give, but if you cannot, if you would, just keep us in your prayers. And to his friends, stay strong, and please just take care of your mental health, because I know this is a lot. It's a lot for us, and I know you guys are feeling some of that too. So thank you all.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
Attorney Crump, Skyler Henry here with CBS News. The last time that you spoke in a setting like this, I know you guys were hoping to get results back from an independent autopsy. I know you mentioned that Nolan had been sent to Washington, D.C. Is there anything to share on that front?
Not at this time, but we hope soon, very soon. Obviously, we're concentrating on the funeral services, but hopefully shortly thereafter, we will be able to tell some findings of the preliminary autopsy. Still waiting on some things. And also, while we're talking about funeral services, want to thank Mr. Tyler Perry for paying for the funeral.
Absolutely. As
well as Colin Kaepernick for helping to shoulder the expense of the independent autopsy. And I thank Reverend Al for agreeing to officiate the funeral services. Yes, sir.
Aaron Gilchrist with NBC News. Mr. and Mrs. Wansley, you said from the very beginning that for you, this was really about getting some answers about what happened to your son. Do you feel like after your meeting today, you have any more clarity on what happened?
Well, it was just a meeting where she talked about the process. She didn't tell us any information about the investigation too much, because those things are, as she said, her role and what she has to do. But they still have questions, and that's not insignificant to this meeting. It's just in general. Every morning they wake up and there's a hole in their heart, and they are trying to say, what happened to my son? Obviously, they feel strongly that he would not have just stayed behind. He wouldn't have left his cell phone. And so we're trying to get to those answers.
Attorney Crump, Brian Rose, GC Wire. There's been a lot of misinformation that's been spread online, especially the pool picture that was shared by you, and you had said that...
Well, I didn't share it, I reposted it. We're reposting everything. Let's make it clear, we're reposting everything because we're trying to get people to come in and call. And so we've said from the beginning, we're in a ferocious search for the truth. And so things out there, we are trying to post, ask people, do you know something about this? Let us know. Just because we repost does not mean that we authenticate anything. Look at our social media. We have always been very careful to say this is a repost, and we almost always give a declaration that that's what it is, a repost. And so we want people to continue to call about everything, videos, whatever interactions they saw, and thank God we are getting dozens of people calling every day saying, I was on Horn Island, this is what I saw, I know these individuals, this is what we know. They said, we understand the sheriff's investigation has hundreds of people calling too. And so the hope is that when this is presented to the grand jury, all relevant witnesses and evidence will be presented to them so that we can have a fair and impartial investigation into the death of Nolan Wells. We were very honest and candid with the district attorney, and she was honest and candid with us. Our lived experiences tell us that we must question everything, everybody's role, law enforcement role. That is the lived experience of us as black people in America. And we would be not honoring the ancestors' sacrifices for us if we did not be honest every chance we got when we talk to power. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the false narrative out there. Well, I've seen quite a few of those, so I was wondering if you could tell us which false narrative you're talking about so we can let people know it's not true. Was there a particular false narrative you were referring to?
There's a lot of narratives out there right now.